Hello there and welcome to our LinkedIn Live on Human Focus Leaders. I'm Sarah and I will be dealing with any questions that you send through as we're going. And this time we are focusing on the Agile Leader. So you might notice that Joan's not here. So unfortunately Joan's not well today. So Michael is going to be deputising for her. As usual, if you could let us know where you're joining from, ask any questions you've got throughout or comment, that's really helpful. It helps us to be as interactive as possible so that everyone gets the most out of the session. So I'm going to hand over to Michael now and he will introduce the session and also introduce our guest, Alexander, who will be talking about the Agile Leader. So over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Sarah. And as evidence of the Agile Leader, obviously deputising for the sick Joan today. So agility at the top of my agenda. I assume most of the listeners, viewers today will recall that we published this research almost 12 months ago. And try to take a sounding through research as to what leadership is required in these challenging times. And we came up with this concept of the and beyond leader, not just thinking about the business or the employees, but the communities we served. And we identified these pillars of what we think the and beyond leader needs. And they were people first, the ability to exploit comms and tech, collaboration, and lastly, this concept of agility. And I'm delighted today to introduce Alexander Filshie, long-time client and friend, a very extensive CV, Alexander, currently CFO of the Kensington Mortgages, a Ned of Travelex, mentor of the ICAEW, and former vice president of the Cornell Club. So extensive career, Alexander. What I want to do today is just share our views on what this Agile Leader is all about. So first of all, we talk about needing to have an Agile mindset. So can you describe what that means to you?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to be here and for that glorious introduction. I think every day an Agile mindset means being able to kind of manage across multiple sets of activities. So that's something that I have to deliver and work with every day. But as I think about the theme, what I would say, an Agile mindset for me is a combination of a kind of building of understanding, of collaborating and connecting with other people, and a mindset that's around continuous learning. Which allows you to be both flexible and prompt, or to be moving fast as well as constantly adjusting your trajectory and your priorities in real time. I think it's an open stance, and probably the single most important thing is kind of be assimilating constantly updates and inputs, new inputs from the environment that changes, and turning those into steps and actions that move things forwards to the ultimate objective or purpose of the organization that you're in.
Okay, and to ask the blindingly obvious question, Alexander, why do you think it's important today in business to have this Agile mindset?
Well, I think if you'd asked me this question 2 years ago, I'd say it's really important because businesses constantly are requiring to adapt and make changes to match the circumstances around them. I think if we ask the question today, I think everybody's living that reality, that everything from risks, concerns, regulations, protocols, constraints, lockdown, every business, everybody has had to adapt and live through those changes. So I think I would think about responding to the world around us, but responding to the change in opportunities and challenges to activity. I think that's the context that makes an agile approach really, really important in my view.
Okay, and do you want to can you share some examples then where you think Agile has benefited businesses, the ones that you've worked in? And I should have said at the outset, not only have you worked at Kensington Mortgages, background in Visa and Airport, so you want to put some flesh on the bones for me, Alexander?
Yeah, sure. So to pick an example, this is a very personal example, but I went into a company that was in a bit of a difficult situation. It was a listed company that had made some big promises to the stock market, had some huge ambitions for what it was able to achieve, but for a combination of reasons, had fallen short in many ways. And so my challenge coming in as part of a new team was really, first and foremost, about assimilating the entire situation, taking a stock very deeply around capabilities, opportunities, strength of customer connections, risks to delivery of the services that this company was providing, and then turning that into a plan, or in fact, a set of plans that allowed a recovery, a rebuilding of momentum in the business, and ultimately moving forward to deliver a strategy of recovery. I think what was special about the approach is, in a situation like that, there is no one thing to solve. There's no one big thing to fix and everything turns around. There aren't three things that you can do. It actually takes 20 or 30 things, maybe even 30 or 40 things, simultaneously being tackled as problems, with a lot of collaboration, a lot of connection between them, that the total impact of all of those micro steps forward, or solving those micro problems, really starts to add up and make a difference. And so personally, what that meant was, as well as assimilating the business very quickly, setting up pieces of work or smaller problems for teams and individual people to work on, and then constantly connecting and collaborating across those different areas of activity so that they stayed synchronized, they stayed coordinated, but actually added up to a bigger wave of activity in the organization. The good news was that set free a lot of potential that was hidden in the organization. People were able to step up, take responsibility, and use their creativity to solve the problems that were kind of put into meaningful parcels. And the total effect was really, really strong. Within 1 year, we had very, very clear signs of an overall turnaround in the business. That came through in more confidence in the company. We got a spring back in our step dealing with our customers. We were able to reset some of the terms with suppliers. And then the punchline was, eventually that became visible to the stock exchange, the stock market, our shareholders, led us ultimately to a favorable valuation and ultimately a trade at more than 5 times the value of the company when the new team came in. So, I put an awful lot of that success down to the agility of the leadership team and the approach that we adopted, that was very much about learning, very much about collaboration and working across and around the people that individually were able to drive the bits of progress that, when you added them all up, made a real difference.
Okay, that's a great story. I suppose what I'm sort of minded is 2 things. One is, particularly where organisations have been immensely successful, getting them to recognise the need for agility, recognise change, and persuading people to move away from, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And the second thing is, are there not consequences of sort of that? As a result of that agility and empowering people will make mistakes. So it was a good story because that worked well for you. But again, as a leader, if you want agility, people have to take risks. So those 2 things, Alexander, one around persuading people of the need for change when they don't want to change, because we've been successful. And the second one, the consequences of empowering people, because there will be on occasions failures. What would you say in response to those?
Yeah, I think really good questions. And I think the link between the 2 is about attitude to risk. I think there's a view, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, is an assumption that we've got the perfect answer, and the kind of risky thing would be to tamper with something that functions. But the story I told was a lot about changing that risk perspective at an individual level, to get to a different place for the total of the enterprise. I think the first point you talked about, engagement and building sufficient engagement that people are prepared to take personal risk and move away from the way we've always done it in the past. And I think in the particular situation I described, very definitely a challenge. First of all, when you set out we can do this in a different way, there's a certain reaction that is a reclarification of the way we already do it. And you've really got to work that is the thing that can block an agile approach. It can block unlocking the potential of doing things in more creative ways or doing things different ways. So you've got to work quite hard, and it's a fact that not everybody is going to make that change. Not everybody's going to make that change at the same pace, and it may well be that some people actually make a different decision and they choose to take their skills, their experiences elsewhere, and that's a reality. You've got to deal with that. I think the other part, the consequences of setting people free, giving people mandates to do things, giving people more delegation, that is a different kind of risk. And if you don't approach that with a level of comfort and a level of confidence, it can create myriad problems where you actually, instead of having lots of people solving individual pieces of a big puzzle, you have them creating their own different puzzles and expending time, energy, resources, which can be diversions to the overall goal rather than alignment to a wider purpose. And I think the best way of managing that balance point, I think, is make sure you've got good connection, good collaboration, a lot of communication and updates between different streams of activity. And if you're a leader in that position, dedicating a lot of your time to creating a forum where people can share ideas, share updates, share progress points, share problems, is an enormous part of it. The leader role becomes a lot less about content, and it becomes about joining the dots, making the connections, facilitating the connections, and the constant collaboration. That means you can have more risk at ground level, and people dealing with those uncertainties at ground level, drawing them all together.
Just see, we've got a good question coming in here from Caroline asking if this could be available as a case study. So, Michael,
Alexander wants to write it up.
Yeah.
Caroline, it's not currently. But coming back to that point,
I think to answer the question, I think there's an element of it that's in the public domain. In that the company I was talking about was called Earthport PLC. It was a UK fintech listed on the London Stock Exchange. If you Google it, you'll get a little bit of the story. And the punchline I didn't say, it was purchased by Visa as a part of their digital strategy within payments, which they've talked about a lot as how they positioned and took on a company. The bit that's the kind of the inside detail is probably less available and probably slightly more sensitive. But it's certainly a valid case of how value comes from a turnaround and a different way of managing.
So coming back, Alexander, this leader who sort of facilitates and empowers and less around the doing. What sort of conditions do we think we need in the organisation, or what sort of employees do we need so that maximises that facilitation? Because I suspect a lot of your finance colleagues are more in this is what we need to do and telling people what to do, as opposed to no, it's really important we develop people who can assess risk, take decisions, and I'm there to corral and coach and make sure they don't do harm to themselves. That type of approach, because that's a very difficult leadership style, isn't it?
Yeah, and I put my hand up. I am a CFO. I've spent 30 years in financial services in one way or another, and I think I'm here to talk more about kind of my experience as a leader that's always tried to work towards an agile mindset rather than a finance professional. And I'm well aware that there is a stereotype out there of finance as being a lot like mathematics, and it's to do with follow all of the rules and give me the bill at the end. There is a requirement for an awful lot of that in finance. But actually what I find interesting is the people in finance, they're people, they're human beings as well. They experience worry, they can be inspired, they can be disillusioned. And these all have direct relationships on the work that is produced. So I do think there's a quite a lot of coaching to get people out of their maybe their kind of narrow view of the world. One of the things that I've always tried to impress upon people is, we're always making choices, and those choices are very seldom should we do it or not. Should we do this or should we do this or should we do this? And getting people to believe that there are always alternatives, and you're choosing between alternatives rather than should we do it or not, is a much better mindset to get into. And that works for finance people, it works for strategy people, it works for sales people as well. The discipline is to believe that there really are viable alternatives for any given situation, to think about those things, and be prepared to explore and spend some time exploring alternatives before any decisions are made. And that to me is a foundation in the culture of an organization. So being prepared to think about alternatives, to go through the mental process of believing that there are alternate ways of doing things. Let's just test them. Let's just think about them before we try and proceed. And that culture doesn't exist in every organization. That culture is something that you've got to work hard to create. And if it's not there, it just makes it all a lot harder. I think the other thing that can be a problem at the other end is random behavior. And I think finance is not so bad now at this, but I think the need to have data, the need to have inputs that are robust. Agility does not mean behaving in unprincipled ways. It doesn't mean behaving in random ways, or purely remarkable ways with no cause or supporting kind of data or assessment. It's the reverse. You've got to get lots of information. You've got to put it into some way of filtering and sorting and prioritizing. And then agility, the flexibility is kind of those different ways of doing it. But the progress comes from making decisions and actually taking steps based upon that information. So if you don't have the information, you're not prepared to believe there's another way of doing things, those are the two things that will really kill an agile approach in my mind.
Okay. And so I just want to take it one step further, because in my mind, I think it's around creating an environment where sort of curiosity is encouraged, where encouraging people to be experimental, but then reflective, learning from their mistakes. So again, it's your role as a leader in trying to sort of take finance people to be curious, ask the questions, to be data rational, to explore these options you said, and then be reflective. How do you best achieve that, would you say?
I think one thing that has been enormously important for me is you get multiple voices in the room. You get different. You kind of take a broad range of inputs. I think we talk about the importance of diversity and inclusion as absolutely fundamental themes in today's world. But I think if it's your privilege to lead or be a part of a diverse team that is functioning in a way that's sharing ideas, generating different perspectives, throwing those into the mix, it's the gift that keeps giving. It's an incredible. You really know when you're in the zone, because you end up with more ideas than we could possibly ever do. You end up with more energy than you ever thought you'd see in a team, and so those two things really contribute enormously to the raw materials, the raw power that you can then harness once you make decisions, you apply templates, prioritization, structures, etc., etc. So be curious, but turn that into other people's curiosity, other people's knowledge, and as a leader, I think kind of spend an enormously disproportionate amount of time listening to other people, and a really small amount of time telling them what you think, because you don't really know that much.
You can see that a question's just come in from Sean, which I think leads on quite nicely from what you were just saying, actually, Alexander. So she's asking, what has been the hardest skill or behaviour to develop in your personal transition to an agile leader, and how did you tackle that? I guess, Michael, you could answer that as well.
Yeah, so great question, and I'll be really honest. I think some of the hardest things I've had to learn, the hardest skills, are actually the finance skills. I think I've been, blessed genetically with a very, very inquisitive mind. with a very collaborative mind. I've done, as many people do, all of the sort of Myers-Briggs and the profile types of things that say my natural style is a collaborator. I develop ideas by research and engagement and conversation. And I feel very, very fortunate to have had some of those things almost innate or kind of developed. So the real hard things are to keep up to date with, the technicalities of finance and the IFRS reporting and capital frameworks, et cetera, et cetera. But I think just to do better justice to your question, I think the when I reflect and I look at, look in the mirror, so to speak, I think the thing I try and keep doing, and I work on all the time, is just feeding more information and more stimulus into the processing capability that I have. And that means reading a wide variety of articles or books or stimuli, talking to a wide network of people, as wide as I possibly can. And I think Michael mentioned the Cornhill Club. It's just one example. It's a city networking club that's been going for nearly 100 years now. Through my engagement in that organization, I've met just an incredible range of people from different parts of the industries I've worked in. And that stimulus, that ideas from somewhere else that might be relevant, might have a role in the recipe I'm working on, is just, it's just a crucial rare ingredient. It's like the rare spices that make a fabulous gourmet recipe rather than just a bowl of hot water.
Yeah. So you asked the question myself, so I mean, I certainly struggled with being someone who, and those people know me, very passionate, very clear vision of what we're trying to achieve, and sort of driving the business and seeing myself as a leader at the front, then being able to step back and listen to other people and indeed embrace views that don't coincide with you, particularly when it's trying to get to a goal and you're fairly clear, I want to do that, that's how we're going to do it. And if you're passionate, you take people with you, and then you've got those voices who are giving you alternatives. And that ability to recognize, actually, yes, your role is to create a very clear vision of what people are trying to achieve, but the actual how you get there, your role is to facilitate the people to come up with the solutions to that. And that, I think, is very difficult. And it sort of leads us on to, sort of conditions when it doesn't work or circumstances. So if I think, Alexander, when you talk about failing business, then sometimes, the leader's role is, look, just get in the lifeboat, just sit there and row and take us away from the sinking ship. And for a short term, that will work. The big problem is when you're faced with very rapidly changing environments around you, that you become fixated on your route, and that need for open-mindedness is critical. What do you think, Alexander?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think there are very, very many situations where, as I said earlier, I think there's always alternatives. There's always solutions where you can bring in some different perspectives, and there are choices that can be made. There are a set of circumstances where that's not really the case. I think the case that springs to mind immediately is, an unpredictable, a predictable situation where there's a set of steps you've got to go through, and the outcome is directly driven by, a liquidation of a failed business is an example. Perhaps more generally, dealing with a legal procedure, legal process, dealing with regulators. You've got to respect that there are rules that you don't get to set, that you have to follow, and compliance is, absolutely necessary to retain the privileges of being a licensed financial services company. So I think those things, you've got to temper your approach, and it's never been my experience that when you're asked a question by the regulator to report on a particular issue, you explain something completely creative, and actually they're asking the wrong question, and there's a different way of thinking about it. Those meetings don't last very long, in my experience. There are different tools applied in different circumstances, absolutely no question. I'm sure there are some aspects of roles outside of finance, outside financial services, where you absolutely have to do the sequence of tasks in the right order, and that's it. I think the good news is there's an awful lot around that is not mandatory and not task driven, and I think it's my experience that those are the things that create the most engagement and the most interest and the most kind of satisfaction in roles in business.
Okay, so as we come towards the end, I just want us to focus on sort of how do we develop that agile mindset. And you very quite rightly referenced the Cornell Club and different experiences, and being curious and finding out what else can you do as a leader to develop that agile mindset, do you think?
So this was a question I thought about before. I mean, I recently met a load of musicians at the Royal Albert Hall, and I was just impressed by just what they were able to achieve together. And I said, so what does it take to become a musician at the Royal Albert Hall? And they said, practice, practice, practice. I think it's the same. If you want to be good at anything, if you want to be good at an agile role as an agile leader, I think you've got to commit to that. You've got to commit to learning. You've got to commit to assimilating. You've got to commit to collaboration and forming solutions with others as the core day job. And then I think to improve, stay humble, take feedback, reflect deeply on successes and failures. I think to me, a part of agility is recognizing success and failure as learning points of equal merit. I think there's a potential human desire to sort of spend more time on the successes and the failures, but actually, I think probably we know it's when you fail, the learning message can be a lot more clear, a lot more obvious, and therefore a lot more valuable as you push forward. And if you're doing lots of things, you've broken down the big problems into lots of smaller pieces that people can work on and can be set free on. They're not all going to work. Some are going to have to get restarted. Some will have to be replaced. Some things have to change. But every one of those things is an opportunity to learn, and you just got to you've got to be maniacal almost about continuously learning from what broke through and moved things forward to what got stuck and why did it get stuck, and is there something that we can do differently to avoid the same mistake? If all of our mistakes are new ones, that's as good as it ever gets. There will be mistakes. The world will keep throwing things out there. The bottom line on an approach to me is an agile approach means you're most capable of reacting, responding, drawing in the thoughts of others into a process, and getting through it and getting on to the next challenge.
Okay. So what I'm going to take from that is sort of summarising, and I'm going to reference it with two sort of key leaders in business. I mean, the first one is and we're on his system today, is the Reid Hoffman of LinkedIn. I suppose summarised very basically, get out more, actually spend time out, learning, spend time with other people, be curious, and actually I think for a lot of people, spending time away from the day job is often seen not a good thing, whereas I'm a great believer that's where you get different ideas and that diversity of thought. And then the second one is this sort of permission to make mistakes, and because that's where we learn, and the Jack Welch apocryphal story around, you've not just lost £1 million, I've made £1 million investment in you. And from a leader perspective, it's difficult because ultimately your hands on the tiller of the boat, and you're accountable, and yet you're going to actually you're going to empower the people to take the boat where you want to take it. So they're the two things I've just taken from that. Anything else from Mary?
Yep, so Mary's just summed up what Alexander said as well there. So saying, well said, recognise success and failure as learning points of equal merit. I think that's great. So yeah, we're about at the end of our session now. So any final thoughts from either of you, or if anyone's got any final questions, then send them in. But otherwise, we will go through and respond to them at a later date.
Final thoughts, Alexander?
I would just say thank you for the opportunity to share some of my experiences. I hope that's been helpful. I think the other thing is, we're all dealing with hybrid working styles, and I think that's been a real test at a personal level, at a corporate level, at an organizational level, at a societal level. There are stumbling blocks. There are new stumbling blocks, but the adaptability of human beings just never ceases to be amazing.
Yeah.
What people can get through, how they can adapt and function in incredible ways under change conditions, to me is a source of renewed confidence. People can make changes, people can evolve, adapt, change, and as a leader, don't ever forget that.
Yeah, and that's a great way to finish it. Thank you very much for spending 30 minutes of your valuable time with us. But that last message around almost trust the people. People have immense potential. I think that's a great message to leave us. Thank you, Alexander.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Sarah.
My pleasure.
So
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you can see we've had a few messages coming through. So that's great. So thank you very much to everyone who's commented. And I'll leave that comment on there from Judith to say she feels quite re-energized. That's really lovely. Oh, and Sean's just saying about positive ending. So so thanks again to Alexander and to Michael and to everyone that's watching. And if you keep an eye on the 1080 page, you will see future events that we have coming up in the pipeline. We've got some things on diversity, imposter syndrome and neurodivergence coming up. So as I said, keep an eye on those and hopefully you'll be able to join us again. A couple more comments that are coming through. So thanks again and we will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.